Good afternoon. Welcome to the film discussion of Black Boys. Thank you for taking part of your day and joining us for this important conversation. I'm Gregory Lee Jr., Senior Assistant Managing Editor for Talent and Community at the Boston Globe. Joining me in today's discussion are film producers Chad Williamson and JT Waterston, who are co-founders of Never Whisper Justice Films. But before we get started with our chat, a bit of housekeeping. For our audience, we will have a question and answer portion during this discussion. Use the Q&A tool at the bottom for you to ask your questions live. This event will be recorded and distributed for post-event. So gentlemen, thank you for taking the time to join us. So let's get started with this discussion. So last night I watched the film and it was just really well done. A lot of things that resonated with me. And I grew up in the South in New Orleans. So a lot of things similarly from the film to the different aspects of the cities that you filmed in. And the first question I have for you guys is, how really did you get involved in this project?
Go ahead, JT.
All right, cool. So about, let's see, I got involved in this project about 3 years ago. At the time, I was working in marketing at an agency, a little boutique agency in Los Angeles. And I was sent to Albuquerque, New Mexico, of all places, to present on, I believe it was email marketing and online advertising, really compelling stuff. And, there was a group of maybe 8 other people, and, we were it was more of an intensive, and we were just working on, how we can position our words better and how we can really inspire people about what it is that we were wanting to sell or get across. And there was this one woman who was speaking about her most recent film that was about modern day segregation in schools. And she was talking about her newest film that was specifically about humanizing young Black men in America. And I felt like, wow, this is way more compelling than what I'm doing right now. I want to meet you. I want to be a part of this. And so we ended up linking up. I started doing more business operations. At the time, I was also getting certified in music production, kind of facilitated some things on that front. Was running set, started as a producer, started as an AP, or PA rather, and then they asked me to be a producer on the film, and it's kind of how to roll it out.
What about you, Chad?
Yeah, JT's talking about our director Sonia, who he met, and I met Sonia when she came through Little Rock, Arkansas. At the time, I was a teacher and had an education organization in Little Rock, and she came through with her film Teacher Saw, which was then acquired by Ava DuVernay and then on Netflix. And we had dinner that night after I had set up a shoot for her with some of my students, and told her about my passion around Black male achievement, and I had been in this space for a little while, and we just sort of hit it off. And then she called me after Teacher Saw was acquired and said, "Do you want to make a film?" And I said, "Sure." And I had no idea what I was saying yes to, but I knew the content was something that I was committed to.
Oh, so when I was looking at the film, what made you guys break the film into 4 segments: the body, mind, voice, and heart? What made you decide to go that route in terms of doing this film?
I remember it sort of taking shape right behind me in my living room on a whiteboard with Sonia. She came over to my place in Flagstaff, and we sort of broke it down. And the providing the full spectrum of humanity for anyone is difficult, much less Black boys and men in America. And I knew from being a former coach and teacher how critical the sports piece was. And Sonia's not really a sports person at all, like zero. And there's some good stories about that. But yeah, she was really invested in the internal landscape, right? And really the heart. And so the 2 thoughts of ours were, how do you break this up into digestible content that's not too crazy heavy, but at the same time, really illuminating the humanity. So that's why we went with the body, mind, voice, heart.
Yeah, I'm just definitely down to what Chad said. I feel like breaking it down into those chapters, body, mind, voice, heart, allows you to really holistically take a look at like a human being in all their dimensions of fullness, and all their dimensions of like vulnerability as well. And I feel like by breaking it down in that way, we were able to not only, I mean, in the process of illuminating, the community of black men and boys in particular, you're also seeing, these similar things in yourself, right? And you're able to relate and you're able to empathize. And it's something where it's like, these are universal themes, universal concepts that are easily digestible, versus really going more micro. And we felt like that was very intentional. And obviously Chad had a lot of whiteboard sessions around that.
Yeah, speaking with the vulnerability, and it was in every segment, you could feel all the vulnerability. How did you get to subjects to really open up about that? Because, being vulnerable in Black men, it's those stereotypes about Black men not being able to show vulnerability, but we are vulnerable. And just want to know, how are you able to get that vulnerability out, and vulnerability? Was that intentional to make sure you get that out even more, given like the images of media portraying Black men?
Yeah, I mean, that word comes up a lot. I was actually breaking down Vic Mensa's interview this morning for some different reasons, and he talks a lot about vulnerability. But the one thing that was interesting, first of all, a lot of the men in the film have been friends for years, so the trust factors were already built in to a certain extent because we knew each other. But there were some that weren't, right? And Sonia does a masterful job of portraying authenticity, and she's vulnerable as well. So she not only asks the questions as far as vulnerability, but she's vulnerable herself. So yeah. I think modeling that behavior allows for anybody that's being interviewed to do the same. But I think the interesting thing about vulnerability, especially in Carmelo's interview, is the fact that he, and I forget if this is in the film or not, but I think it's not. But he talks about if he was vulnerable in his neighborhood, that's actually a negative, because then he would get exploited. And yes. So I think we have to have deeper conversations around this word vulnerability, because Brene Brown has done such a good job of bringing vulnerability to like the masses of the universe, but yet we really haven't talked about it from a cultural relevancy and a cultural responsiveness understanding about who can be vulnerable in different places and where that is power and where that is weakness.
And just to once again go off that, what Chad is saying is really, one, there's two parts. I feel like when it came to creating a safe space, I believe that we were very intentional about, not having too many people in the room, really making it feel comfortable. And obviously there were a fair amount of relationships that were built in advance. But just going back to that vulnerability conversation, Chad, I think that's very powerful. I believe that, there's this sense of cultural humility that you have to have in order to really understand, or truly know that you don't understand what this person is going through, or these concepts, these feelings, these emotions that you feel are really based on your personal experiences, and you can't project those. And so I feel like, within that safe space that we created, the first thing that we did was, we listened. That was the main goal, just to be there and to listen. And I've had countless people come to me and talk about the film and say that they were so happy with it because there wasn't any white splaining. It was mostly just, Black men talking about their own experiences. And I feel like, Sonia and Chad in particular did a great job with that, because, although, they have their own places of privilege being, white individuals, there's a great quote that Malcolm in London says, where it's, love says that I don't know, but I'm committed to finding out. And I felt like that was so powerful, because like at the heart of that finding out is just listening, even when you don't understand, because that you have such a just different perspective. So.
And when you were doing this film, what did you learn along the way that perhaps you didn't even think about before? Or anything that specific that you saw that, you just going through, but in your mind is like, I didn't think about it in that way. What were there any areas that you noticed about that, just about yourself?
Go ahead, JT.
A lot.
I mean, I can give some just specific tangible stuff.
Okay, go ahead.
I mean, obviously, for me, I was very interested in interrogating my whiteness, even though I grew up up around Black people my entire life. My dad was in the military. I was in the military, most diverse organization in the world. You know, my first grade teacher was a Black female. My dad's first boss was a Black male. So like these issues of growing up in a segregated situation was not my lived experience. However, like language around cultural humility, I think the language was the biggest piece. Like language about justice impacted people, right? Underserved, racial battle fatigue, right? In college, primarily, you know, from going to a PWI, I think was really interesting. I mean, I could go on and on, like even just the language of allyship. How do you even define what allyship is? So yeah, like how do I show up, right, as a privileged white male in America with advantages that just come to me because of the society that we live in? How do I navigate the space, and then how do I decenter myself? That way, other stories are also brought to the top.
For me personally, I believe that healing was a huge concept that came out. You know, Sean Dev, one of the voices of the film, very strong voices of the film. You know, he said that, you know, healing comes, you know, in community, and I feel like, or in community we can heal, rather. And I believe that, you know, for any minority individual, especially Black boys, Black men, it's oftentimes when we're interacting with the world that doesn't necessarily relate to us or validate us or see our worth or value. I think that we deviate from community, and we kind of, you know, make ourselves small and maybe even isolate in a lot of ways. And I feel like for me personally, you know, I had a very similar life experience with Chad, in the sense that, you know, I was a military brat. I grew up on bases. I moved around a lot, and they were actually majority white communities. So I feel like, you know, there was only, in my immediate community, there was only so much I had the ability to relate. And so throughout this film, I was able to be placed into contact with so many amazing Black people, like so many people that like I was able to see myself in, or, you know, aspire to, or even, you know, learn this language that like changes your reality, similar to what Chad was saying. And I felt like that was a big healing process for me personally, because I didn't feel like I had that growing up outside of my immediate family. And I feel like not a lot of people have that, generally speaking, and not a lot of Black people have that, generally speaking. So that kind of goes into, you know, Sharif Al-Mekki, great educator out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He talks about the importance of windows and mirrors. And you know what, I can go off on that, but I think Chad's a lot better at explaining it.
No, go
ahead.
No, I was saying, one part that resonated when you mentioned the battle fatigue, the racial battle fatigue, and our segue to the next question I was going to have was that what resonated with me was in Chicago, when they mentioned taking a group of Black kids from one part of the city into downtown Chicago. And sadly, in many big cities, minorities, particularly Black people, don't really wade into white areas, not just young people, but older people. I never forget my first stint in Boston. I loved going out to Italian restaurants, but I was like one Black person and maybe my party there. Black people didn't go there. They didn't go to those areas because they wanted no part of it. And then I had an anecdote shared with me by a white teacher in Brooklyn who had Black students who'd never been to Manhattan. You know, what do you think about that kind of conditioning that Black people encounter? Because I know, when we talk about the fatigue part, I think part of the reason some of my friends didn't go in Boston to those restaurants, because during the day we work with mostly white people. So why we want to go hang out with them or be in their area at the end of the day and have dinner, and we're supposed to be like, I'm just trying to relax. So did you feel that during your filming about feel that racial battle fatigue, so to speak?
You know, I don't know how to necessarily answer that question the best, but I will tell you this. In the interview with Carmelo and with Vic, just because I've been going over those interviews a little bit more, Carmelo talks about how when he grew up in New York, that that they didn't hardly ever see white people, right? And then when they did, it was so uncomfortable, not only for him, but for them as well. And so I think that there's like this pull through thread of that within a lot of people. Like, again, where are we segregated? And it seems like it's almost everywhere, in all reality. So I think it's interesting to hear the stories, the lived experiences of the people that we did interview in the film, because they all have their own rendition of this.
Right.
And, you know, I mean, you can talk about it more than I can, because
yeah, I mean,
no, you went to an HBCU. How does an HBCU make you feel, right?
Well, my experience was kind of different because I was fortunate. I started off in a white school. It was an evangelical Christian school. So early in my life, I was dealing with a lot of white people. I was like one of 3 or 4 kids who were black in the class growing up through 6th grade. And then I was able to go to then I went to a mixed Catholic school, and then I went to an all white boys school. It was a good experience, but it was just different. Then I went to a black high school. Then I went to an HBCU. So I was fortunate to be able to, early on, I think in life, I always believed that for first instances for black boys, especially, they need to have interactions with white people early in life. That's when you get your formative thoughts. That's when you get your formative ideas. You'll be able to get comfortable. For me, I was able to because I was exposed to that earlier. Whereas in the flip side, when you watch the film, you know, like you said, most black boys didn't really experience when you growing up being around white folks, so they could never really get comfortable with them. That was the opposite when I grew up. I was fortunate in that way. But I saw the differences in my high school classmates who were black and dealing with white folk, and it's real. And I'm a firm believer that and especially when you did all the education portions, that the more exposure you get early on, the better off the kids are down the line.
And for white kids too, right?
And white kids,
maybe even more so.
Yes. How do we, my next, let me see, I got a lot of questions here too. All right, one more question, I'm gonna get to the Q&A because I see some questions coming in. It's a 2-part question. From the film, where does the healing come from these conditions, and how can we achieve our desired humanity? How can black boys get to achieve the humanity that we deserve? I mean, from this, just what did you learn from this film that there's maybe some steps that we can move towards that, achieving that humanity for us?
So I'll start on that. I believe that there's been this thought perpetuated where when it comes to like systemic racism, things like that, that's a black issue, and like that's totally wrong, right? That's a human issue, right? And so I feel like black people don't have the ability to solve people treating them more human in a vacuum, right? And so I feel like the only way that can occur is if we have co-conspirators who are interested in taking notice and also having a voice and a shared voice in, elevating the conversation and, deconstructing a lot of these systems that are in place. And so I feel like, that's going to come through, embracing the tensions of things that we just talked about, like racial battle fatigue, and even having these conversations and being able to kind of like lean into that tension and really find that palpable growth that allows us to continue and compound like these conversations and really create change.
Yeah, I sort of like to see this as of late. We're constantly learning, right? Because we're continuing to break this film down in many different areas through many different conversations. But I like to sort of understand it for myself through the burden, right? Who carries this burden? And I think, ultimately, if white teachers, K-12 teachers in America, were to take on this burden, the one thing that I found being a classroom teacher in Little Rock, Arkansas, teaching 10th graders, is there was nothing more important than allowing them to share their personal narratives, personal stories to the entire class. And so I created a whole curriculum around it, which was telling their stories. And they had 12 slides. They started with a baby picture, ended with a current day picture, and then they filled those images in to create their own life narrative. And they took control of that, and they had all the time that they wanted to present that to the class. And that became a source of power. And so what I think is, in a predominantly white society, white voices have been heard in that predominant fashion, right, for hundreds of years. And those stories have been through the white gaze and the white lens. And so until we shift that and allow other people, which is happening, right? Allow people, and we are the listening group with intent on listening, then things I think will start to shift and change as a result. Because a new study just came out yesterday, the day before. How do you cross the political divide, the racial divide? You have to listen to people's lived experiences. Yeah. And if you don't, facts don't work. Facts don't work. We have all the facts. You need the feelings, man. And until that happens, like, you can't go deeper with humanity.
Someone asked a question what HBCU meant, so I would give you the definition: historically Black colleges and universities. So I went to Xavier University, in New Orleans. You've heard of Howard University, where the vice president went to college, Kamala Harris. So we have a number of HBCUs around the country. So that's what HBCUs mean for our audience.
And PWI means predominantly white institution, which is the majority.
Right. So just Louisiana State University.
Just my home state. The University of Arkansas. The University of Arkansas is a predominantly white institution, right?
In Louisiana, we don't care for the University of Arkansas. That's another conversation.
I thought I'd throw that out there.
So we go to the questions from our audience. The first question is: my son is white. His son is Black because his wife is Black. They have another baby boy on the way. Do you have any specific advice for a white man raising a Black son? His son, my grandson, will be 19 months old tomorrow, and I know the world will identify him as Black.
I know JT does not have a child, nor do I, and I have zero advice for that.
There you go.
JT might.
I think that education is key. I think cultural humility is key. I have a good friend of mine who works at an institution called PACT up in San Francisco that is specific to, white parents who are adopting children of color. And I feel like there's a learning gap in that because like the perspectives are definitely different, and the way in which, your son is going to perceive the world is going to be, or the world is even going to receive them, is going to be very different. And so I feel like speaking to, really diving into their community and like understanding like their history, not just your history, and bringing to them like the understanding of like what their Blackness means, I feel like it's going to be a very beneficial experience for you both. And it's something that has the ability to deepen your relationship for sure.
Great, that's good, great answer there. So next question would be from the audience is: how did you decide who to include in the film? There were so many really interesting voices. How did you make that determination who you put in the film?
Well, we definitely started, as soon as Sonia asked if I wanted to make a film, I thought about the friends that I could bring into the mix. And Greg Scruggs was one of the first guys I called. Malcolm London was one of the first guys I called. I had already met Justice Alan Page, so that was our first shoot. I'd met him many years ago. And there was just a lot of people that I brought into the mix. And then that just led to people saying, like Howard Bryant actually was our first interview in Minneapolis. And right away, he was willing to open his Rolodex. Like, who do you want to talk to? Right. And so it sort of led from there, because I think people felt the intention, people felt the reasoning and the meaning behind what we were trying to do, the work that we were trying to do. Like, we're not just trying to make a film to make a film. We're trying to make a film for educational purposes and for it to live for a long time, to go deeper with the subject matter. And so people just opened up, and we're introducing us to people left and right.
Great. So another question is, what are the plans for distributing it so that you get lots of visibility for this film? So you can show the audience when it's coming out and how long it's going to be, and those things to promote the film? Because I think it's very important for everyone to see this actually.
Yeah, so it's currently can be streamed for free on NBC Peacock. It's going to be there for the next few years. And then it's also available, I believe, towards the end of the month on Apple and Amazon for TVOD.
Great. It's very important. And people have a lot of time to consume projects like this, given that we're at home with the pandemic, and we've noticed a lot of people have watched a lot of films, and this is the right time to actually fill our brains and our minds and to be educated about subjects that we don't know about. A lot of people don't know about, and this is one important subject given the moment that we're in right The next question is, what can everyone do to make sure we have more Black teachers, both male and female, in schools in both predominantly Black and white neighborhoods?
That's a tough one. I would say call Sharif El-Mekki in Philadelphia, the Center for Black Educator Development. He is the guy that is, is spearheading this along with many others, but he knows everything that needs to be known in regards to producing a pipeline and producing as many Black educators as possible. He started with Black male educators. He's obviously one of them. But he and the Center for Black Educator Development are on top of that work. And if we didn't mention him and what they're doing, we would be doing him a disservice. So the Center for Black Educator Development in Philadelphia is the place to start.
I mean, I know growing up, I didn't see my first Black male teacher until high school. And as I mentioned before, I think the most valuable time to get that image is when you're in kindergarten, first grade, second grade. That's where your mind starts to formulate your worldview. Even though at that age, you don't expect kids to think that way, but they are. That's our first impressions. And over time, there's not really a pool of Black males who are actually teach in that level. And I think it's very critical for especially Black boys to see Black men in positions of authority and nurturing and mentoring, which was another big subject, I think, that was touched upon in terms of what the Black male is looking for. They said we need mentoring, we need father figures. And especially early in life, there's no really, like, if they don't have a father at home, the possibility your next spot is school. And they won't see that maybe to high school. And by that time, they could be, their mind is somewhere else, or they're not ready or conditioned to receive leadership from a Black male by the time they get to high school, because they see that image growing up.
Yeah, and to provide historical context, right? When desegregation happened, like 40,000 Black teachers lost their jobs.
Yep.
So, we have to understand that what happened in the 1950s is in direct relation to why we don't have a slew of Black educators today. And that's our own fault, and I think that, that's when you start to say, well, what are the policies behind this to get more Black educators into the classroom? And this goes hand in hand with a lot of other things, right? Because, the first Kentucky Derby winner was a Black man, and then they made a rule to where they couldn't ride horses in the Kentucky Derby. So like, this isn't, 2% of educators are Black males, 2% of pilots, Black males. This 2% number is actually pretty significant in a lot of different career fields because it has been systemic and institutionalized. And we have to understand the context of history that have gotten us to where we are today.
Yeah, just to double down on what Chad's saying. I mean, even in response to desegregation, you had a majority of not to get too political. You had a majority of private schools opening up to basically choose not to desegregate. And I feel like that's something that isn't looked at when it comes to like private school history, and that's something that has to be internally interrogated nationwide. And then basically what you did is you created this caste system, of children, like you think of minority children must go to public schools, and like you think of, oh, if you're rich white or like even middle class, I aspire to these private schools. You're just creating this divide. And so I think that on top of like representation and the culture of representation, and just like that's those 2% numbers that Chad's saying that are proliferated everywhere, and what's being seen on screen, it's problematic. And I feel like that's something that this film tried to tackle.
And going back and just follow up on the media aspect of it, as a person who I've been in media for almost 25 years, mostly in sports journalism, and seeing, especially with the football player, Mr. Scruggs, and what he had to endure. What can the media do in terms of trying to help change that narrative of the Black male? Because that's where it really starts. The whole beginning of the film was talking about the first images that are shown, whether it be toys, whether it be cartoons, whether it be the news. It's all media, it's all images. What can be done to try to change that narrative?
This is where you bring in Kevin Merida and the Undefeated, right?
Yeah, that's right.
This is like bring in the experts. We actually interviewed Kevin in Minneapolis in our first shoot. and we didn't do a good enough job on doing it to get him in the film. So, but he's amazing. It's interesting because I don't know if you listen to the podcast Huddle and Flow.
I know. Yeah, Huddle and Flow. Yeah.
So they've talked a lot about the hiring process of Black coaches for the NFL, right? I mean, that's number one on a lot of people's list right now, just because it's a hot topic.
Yeah.
But also peel back I've been thinking about this a lot, and I haven't brought this up, and I know it's not going to be, well, whatever. It might piss some people off.
That's all right. I like to piss off people.
So in the sports industry, because I worked for a guy who played in the NFL for 3 years, and I really saw some interesting things happening. You have to peel back the layers of the onion on where race fits in at every level. So it's not just the head coach, right? We also know it's Byron Leftwich. It's the assistant coaches. It's the front office people. But the one place that we don't talk about are the publicists of all these Black athletes. And I will tell you this, the majority of them are white females, right? Now, I have no problem with that. Well, no, I do have a problem with that. The problem I have with that is that means that Black male getting coached up on what to say is coming through the lens of a majority white female.
White women, yes.
Right? So I've never seen that talked about yet. I'm sure I would piss off a lot of white females based on this, but I have seen it with my own eyes in different places, and they don't even know what they're doing. Like, you
also look at from agents too, because most of the agents 100%. Are white males.
100%.
And that's the thing. I think that one, when it comes to the publicist, like, that's the person who's telling this person's story, right? This
exactly.
is crafting their story, right? So, it's one of the things of having like agency of your story, and also having the, I don't know how many publicists are necessarily looking at like Brown v. Board of Education and like critique, or even looking at the history of these individuals and understanding what it is their narrative actually is, and who they're actually, they need to become for the community around them. I think that's the problem. I think that the biggest thing is, I think that the burden is on the Black community to, be so much better and be beyond, or be perfect in a lot of ways. Because I would say that, sorry, I'm gonna wrap that up a little bit.
No, keep going.
No. I believe that like telling your story is very important, and the medium that you use to tell your story is very, very important. Like Chad said with the publicist, and you have to be very discerning about who's telling your story, because not everyone knows what the potential of your story is or what the impact is as well. So, this person who's telling your story, they can't look back one family generation and see poverty and see, pain and see, people not going to college, like most Black people that I talk to, like, that's what it is. Like, literally you look like grandparents, like great grandparents, etc. Like, there's not a lot for us, generally speaking. And so when you're thinking about creating generational wealth and creating a legacy, like, you got to be very intentional about that legacy, because some people aren't for you in the way that they think they're for you. So that's all I want to say. Sorry.
And just to clarify, like, I'm not saying that all white women PR people or publicists are bad people. I'm not saying that at all. But I would say that I bet that it sort of goes hand in hand with white teachers, and the fact that I haven't interrogated my own privilege. I haven't interrogated my own cultural lens and my own cultural bias on how I'm dealing with this situation. And so I'm doing my job. I went to sports business school. I'm going through the motions of this, but let me tell you what they don't teach you in sports business school: cultural humility. You've never used that language, right? So I think that there's things at every career field where there's this lack of cultural responsiveness and cultural understanding that you need, that puts you in the listening seat, as opposed, and it goes back, I got my master's in public service from President Clinton School, and we talked about the difference between serving and steering. And so I think there's a lot of people that steer and they don't understand the process of serving the story as opposed to steering the story.
And when you go to talk about teachers, I think that probably one of the biggest failings in the school systems when it comes to educating is that teachers go in the classroom with this one-size-fits-all approach to teaching. And that does not apply to whether it be a boy, girl, Black, white person, because they don't understand the perspectives, how this story or what you're trying to teach how it pertains to a Black person or is received differently. The language is different.
And I wouldn't necessarily blame that on the teacher as much.
No, I'm not blaming the teachers. It's the way the system is structured in terms of that.
Yeah, 100%.
It's not the teacher's fault. This is how they got educated. Yep. This is how you train the teachers.
Yep.
So I got another question here. I'm curious. This question is for Chad. Did your race open doors for production of this film with your cohorts? I ask this often. I ask this often because when a Black entrepreneur attempts to put forth an idea, they often are not supported, embraced, or encouraged. To move forward, it always required the endorsement of a white person.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I would default to yes, right? Because I mean, that's sort of the way the society works. Ultimately, we received funding through friends of mine, right? Because they had capital. Yep. So yeah, there is an advantage. There was an advantage, I'm sure, and there will continue to be until we start to be honest about those systems as well. Right. But yeah, it's all systemic, right? Like
all systemic. It's like even we go back to you talk about publicists and stuff, and the one of the things that in terms of media, I think we do a poor job of is when LeBron James came out and he has his own team, and he built them, Black guys who are agents, who are his business partners. And it feels as if that, they're changing the game. It's, and it's like, feels like, so some of the media is like, oh, they are threatened to the establishment of, we're running away to white agents because of these guys. And there's all these stories about them early on, and they're negative connotative stories about what they're trying to accomplish. And all they're doing is trying to represent their player, but doing it in a different way. And LeBron has opened up doors for other people like that. And I think that's the biggest problem people feel, and I guess in the media, or not just media, but in those industries, that they feel like it's a threat instead of like embracing competition.
Yeah, well, now you're opening up another hour of programming.
Because I've seen it. I've seen it first just as an editor, looking at the stories. I'm like, what's up with? I know exactly where it's coming from because of how the industry, the sports journalism industry works. I mean, you see how they're portrayed. And it's really unfair, so to speak. So
yeah, and I would say it's deeply rooted in white fear.
Yeah. One more. We got another question. Was it intentional to frame the conversations from the perspective of the Black men caring for and about the boys in this movie?
Go ahead, JT.
Yeah. Yes. So I would say it definitely was intentional about really having. I think that, it being called Black Boys, the reason why I was called Black Boys is because you have, as a young child, you're an innocent, as a young child, you come into the world kind of like doe-eyed, and you are relatively like vulnerable. You are a blank slate, right? And then the world tells you who you are. You build a callousness, you build an identity. And I feel like, the reason why we wanted to have Black men speaking out their experiences, and also just Black boys speaking about their experiences, because these Black men who you see, at one point they were a boy, and a lot of them lost their innocence in the process of just doing small things like going to school because of like we said, racial battle fatigue, or did lost their innocence in the process of just having to, or even lost some of their identity in the process of doing small things like going to work and having to change the way they speak, or change the way that they dress, or basically accommodate this world that isn't meant to accept them, generally speaking. And so we felt like showing both of those worlds really kind of built that bridge, and allows the audience to see, okay, like I do see the innocence in each of these figures, and if I don't, I need to interrogate that.
Cool. Let's see, we have any more questions coming in here? Let me make sure I'm talking to my team.
Well, I saw somebody in the chat talking about the aspect of white people representing Black people in their stories. And I think one of the biggest things for us going into it was that we intentionally were not, right? That we intentionally were asking questions. And I think you saw Sonia on camera like one time because it was actually a filming issue that we had to do that. So I want to make sure that we're clear on the fact that our goal was never to tell anybody else's stories that didn't look like us. It was only to provide a platform that maybe did not exist yet. So how do we cultivate that? How do we decenter our whiteness to bring stories that need to be told to the top?
The one part of the movie I actually like, and it could have been sport, it could have been another segment of 2 minutes, but just talking to the Black women, the two mothers, about raising Black boys, and that whole situation, that whole scene, you could have gone much deeper in that, but just getting their examination, their understanding of it, and their feelings of it. Did you think about considering trying to go a little bit more deeper with the Black mother, because a lot of Black male boys are being raised by single mothers? Did you think about exploring a little bit deeper with that?
Yeah, we would have loved to. I think it would have probably added another how long onto the film. I think that was just the only context of it. And there's been a lot of talk about creating the film Black Girls. That would be a complementary piece to Black Boys as well. And our mindset going into it obviously was focused on Black boys and Black men. And the other issue that I think I would like to say is, I was talking to an academic about this a couple of years ago, and he said, Chad, it's really important to understand that you can't just lump Black boys and men into Black males, because the Black boy experience is different than the Black man experience, and that needs to be separated. And so the depth by which we tried to go in listening to Black men and boys, while also having a piece of having moms in there, we wanted to try to find that balance. And obviously it's impossible to have, right? Because you'd love to hear more moms, right? You'd love to hear more women talking about this. So hopefully we can do that in the future and through different mediums.
JT, you have anything on that?
I agree. I believe that we are creating more projects that really do center Black women, and with Black girls in particular. Just what you said, I think, is a very strong point in the fact that the majority of young Black men are in single parent households where the mother is playing both roles. And I feel like that is something that is a major point to be covered. And I also think that we are going to be showing that depiction of what it is to be that type of mother and be that figure, and what that means like in future projects, for sure.
I get the feeling that this project is like the first part of probably a series of things your team could probably go into. There's a lot of different aspects you got into, but you couldn't really get into it even more to break out more, pull it out more. It's like we mentioned about the mothers, mentioning with the athletes, mentioning with the school part. It seems to me that you have an opportunity to, as a company and a team, if you want to or pursue, possibly the second and third parts to go to accompany this film.
Yeah, and this has been, honestly, I've been committed to this work for decades, since I started teaching as a teacher, since becoming a teacher. And, I'm not losing that zest. I will tell you, I was up at 2 a.m. this morning because I wanted to break down Vic Mensa's interview line by line and minute by minute, because we've created an online digital platform called Frontlines of Justice, where we're breaking down the film into episodes and modules for professional development to really go deeper into the meaning. We went to 15 states, 15 plus cities. We interviewed over 50 people. There were over 30 people that didn't even make the film that were unbelievable interviews. And so the content that we still have yet to disseminate is pretty significant and will be very educational. So there was somebody, I think, in the chat that talked about, is there a resource guide? And it is coming. It's just going to be in a high level digital format.
Great. Well, we are at that conclusion. We want to thank you, Chad and JT, for sharing this very powerful story with all of us. It was a great film, and yes, it should be in educational series. I think it should be also a part of any workshops that going on during this moment. A lot of companies and corporations are showing films, documentaries, or having conversations about subjects that are involved in this moment. And hopefully this film will be part of that conversation. So again, thank you very much for sharing your time with us and the audience. And I thank you, the audience, for taking the time to spend 45 minutes with us this afternoon. And we're going to look out for more of the Black History Month Film Festival from the Boston Globe. Thank you very much and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Greg.